According to reports, the transcript presents a wide-ranging commentary attributed mainly to author Tom Bower and other commentators discussing Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, suggesting that Harry is unlikely to return to a traditional role in Britain and that Meghan is also not expected to return, while noting that recent public appearances have shown the couple smiling despite claims that Meghan no longer has major income streams following the conclusion of her Netflix series and the absence of a currently active podcast, with uncertainty expressed about her future professional direction and suggestions that her personal brand is facing challenges, alongside references to a business venture called American Riviera Orchard and claims that its concept was disputed, as well as repeated claims that Meghan sought wealth and fame and targeted Harry at a specific point when she was preparing to promote her Netflix series and did not want to be publicly associated with him during that time, with further claims that Invictus remained Harry's main public platform and that it was used strategically during that period. The transcript also includes discussion of Meghan's preferences regarding surnames and titles, including past remarks in an early lifestyle series about identifying as Sussex rather than Markle and saying she felt she did not previously have a proper surname, along with references to retail brands and anecdotal stories used to illustrate cultural differences, and further commentary that Meghan lacked a deep understanding of British royal history, did not fully appreciate how Princess Diana earned public affection, and was warned repeatedly before marriage about the nature of royal life but was described as ignoring that advice because she believed she could act independently and because, according to the commentary, she never intended to remain in the royal system long-term and instead intended to return to California with the title and connections. The transcript repeatedly frames these points through Bower's perspective, presenting his view that Meghan aimed to use royal status as a platform for building a personal brand rather than as a long-term commitment, and it also includes broader observations that California culture and royal culture differ, leading to changes in Harry's public image that, according to the speakers, appeal to fewer people than before. There is extensive discussion of claims that various public narratives presented by Meghan over time were disputed by Bower, including differing accounts of her childhood, her education, financial support from her father, and the origins of a well-known advertising story linked to her early activism, with the transcript stating that her father paid for private schooling, acting lessons, and other expenses, supported her ambitions, and remained involved in her early career, and that later changes in how this background was described publicly were characterized by Bower as inconsistent with earlier accounts. The transcript also references the Oprah interview and states that Bower identified numerous contradictions within it, including statements about the timing of the couple's marriage ceremony, the reasons behind titles for their son, and the availability of support for mental health, with it being stated that official figures publicly disputed parts of those claims at the time. There are also repeated references to Australia tour events in 2018, with the transcript citing alleged staff accounts that describe demanding behavior during the tour, mid-tour changes, and tensions with aides, while also noting that the public response to the tour was highly positive at the time, and that this reaction was interpreted by some commentators as reinforcing Meghan's belief in her own importance within the royal structure. Further discussion in the transcript centers on the couple's behavior during significant royal events such as the late Queen's funeral, with claims that while public displays suggested possible reconciliation, recorded material for later media projects had already been finalized, a point framed as creating a contrast between public appearances and private media plans. The transcript also discusses reports that Meghan and Harry explored the possibility of using the Spencer surname for their family as part of identity and branding considerations, a request that was reportedly declined, and it links this to broader claims that Meghan strongly associated herself with Princess Diana's image and legacy, including through clothing, symbolism, and public comparisons. In addition, the transcript mentions that the couple's media partnerships have shifted over time, with Spotify ending its podcast arrangement with public commentary, Netflix reducing future projects, and Archewell's reported activity levels decreasing, alongside broader claims that public approval ratings have declined in multiple countries and that general public interest has lessened. There are also repeated observations that Meghan continued to use her royal title in various public and political contexts, including when contacting political figures about policy matters, which some speakers suggested could affect perceptions of her role outside the monarchy. The transcript further suggests that both Meghan and Harry are facing a period of uncertainty regarding their professional identity and long-term public role, with speakers describing this as an identity challenge that may evolve in the coming months, and attributing many of these developments to what Bower characterizes as repeated patterns in decision-making, narrative framing, and media strategy, rather than to isolated incidents, with additional commentary that some former professional partners eventually ended their working relationships due to creative disagreements and concerns about control of content. Throughout, the transcript consistently frames these points as interpretations, research findings, and opinions expressed by Bauer and other commentators rather than as confirmed legal findings, while also noting that many of the claims have been publicly disputed at different times and remain part of ongoing public debate. No official confirmation yet. According to reports, the continuation of the discussion further elaborates on the same general themes by reiterating that commentary attributed to Tom Bauer and other speakers frames Meghan Markle's public role primarily through the lens of branding, media strategy, and control over narrative, with repeated emphasis on the idea that her approach to public life differed from traditional royal expectations and that this difference contributed to ongoing tensions with palace systems and staff, while also extending earlier points about how public support initially appeared strong during major appearances such as overseas tours but later shifted as media projects, interviews, and commercial ventures accumulated. The transcript returns to the topic of changing public perception by noting that what was once described as widespread enthusiasm gradually gave way to skepticism as discrepancies between public statements and institutional responses were widely discussed, and it again emphasizes that the central source for many of these claims is Bauer's research rather than official documents. There is additional reference to the couple's relocation to the United States and how this move was followed by a series of high-profile interviews, documentaries, and proposed business initiatives that initially generated attention but later faced uncertainty, delays, or termination, with Spotify's public decision to end their podcast arrangement being cited as one example that commentators interpreted as a sign of cooling industry confidence, and Netflix reportedly narrowing the scope of future content being described as another indicator of shifting commercial momentum. The transcript also revisits the role of Archewell by noting that its reported output and public visibility have fluctuated, with some periods of high-profile announcements followed by quieter phases, which speakers interpret as contributing to uncertainty about long-term direction. Throughout this section, the narrative remains focused on how public image, media partnerships, and perceived credibility are closely linked and how changes in one area are considered, by the commentators, to affect the others. The discussion again touches on family relationships, not by introducing new factual events but by restating that strained connections with both royal relatives and Meghan's father have remained a recurring subject of public attention, and that these personal dynamics continue to be interpreted differently by different audiences depending on which accounts they find more credible. The transcript also again references the idea that Meghan and Harry's use of titles in professional and political contexts attracts public scrutiny, particularly in environments outside the United Kingdom where royal conventions are less clearly defined, and it suggests that this creates an ongoing debate about how their status should be understood in relation to activism, entertainment, and business activities. There is repeated mention of the contrast between early expectations that the couple would successfully blend celebrity influence with humanitarian work and the more mixed outcomes that followed, with speakers pointing to reduced visibility of large-scale projects as evidence that sustaining that balance has been challenging. The transcript further indicates that some commentators believe both Meghan and Harry are now in a phase where future opportunities depend heavily on whether public trust in their narrative stabilizes or continues to decline, and that this uncertainty is compounded by the passage of time since their departure from royal duties, which gradually reduces the immediacy of that association as a central defining feature. The language used continues to frame these developments as part of an evolving public story rather than as conclusions based on legal judgments or official reports, and it is repeatedly noted that many of the interpretations depend on individual assessments of credibility, media framing, and audience response. The segment again stresses that while critics attribute recurring patterns to intentional strategy and brand management, supporters may view the same actions as attempts at self-definition outside a restrictive institutional environment, and the transcript itself does not resolve these opposing interpretations. Overall, this portion reinforces the earlier portrayal of a prolonged period of transition marked by fluctuating media relationships, unresolved public debates about past statements and decisions, and ongoing speculation about future direction, while consistently presenting these points as commentary and analysis rather than as formally verified outcomes. According to reports, this section of the discussion continues to focus on analysis and commentary surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry by reiterating that their post-royal public life has been shaped largely by a series of media projects, interviews, and commercial efforts that generated strong initial attention but later faced challenges in maintaining long-term momentum. with speakers again pointing to the ending of certain high-profile partnerships as an indicator of shifting industry confidence rather than as proof of any single failure, and noting that these developments are interpreted by commentators as part of an ongoing adjustment period rather than a definitive outcome. The transcript reinforces the idea that public perception has evolved over time, with early narratives of independence and reinvention gradually giving way to more mixed reactions as multiple versions of past events, personal history, and royal experiences circulated in the public domain and were reviewed alongside institutional responses, which some observers say contributed to a more cautious reception. There is further emphasis on the idea that the couple's continued association with royal titles remains a central point of debate in how their public roles are understood, particularly when those titles appear in connection with political advocacy, entertainment projects, or business outreach, and that this dual identity of private citizens and titled public figures creates ongoing questions about boundaries and expectations. The transcript also highlights that repeated discussion of past conflicts, interviews, and personal grievances is viewed by some commentators as limiting the range of narratives available to the couple in future projects, while others argue that these reflections are part of an ongoing effort to explain their perspective on a highly visible period of their lives. In addition, the transcript references the idea that public interest is influenced not only by controversy but also by originality and new initiatives, with speakers suggesting that long-term public engagement may depend on whether future work moves beyond retrospective themes and into areas that are seen as distinct from earlier royal associations. The discussion again touches on the broader context of shifting public attention in the entertainment and media landscape, noting that interest in any public figures can rise and fall quickly depending on novelty, relevance, and credibility, and that the couple's experience is being evaluated through that same changing environment rather than in isolation. Overall, this portion of the transcript presents their current position as one of transition marked by uncertainty about future projects, evolving public perception, and debate over how their past statements and royal connections will continue to shape their opportunities, with all of these points expressed as commentary and interpretation rather than as established fact. No official confirmation yet.